Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tableau Server Admin User Group. My name is Mark Wu. I'm the server admin. I manage a really large server with a few hundred of cores. Today, my topic is Zen Master Guide to improve server performance, mainly around server render time performance. This is not for the beginners. Back in May, I had one presentation mainly focused on the beginners of server admins. I call it Tableau Server Admin 101. And you can review that recording, and I do have a slide deck attached as well. And then back in September, I talked about how to improve background efficiency, focusing on the 2020.3 new features, suspend extract refresh, also tag stilled content. You can also, of course, reduce timeout. And also you can make more bandwidth by swapping this QL with backgrounder at any time. Today, I'm focusing on the server performance, how to improve the render performance. This is what typically people say at Tableau server performance. Where you can find the previous recordings, especially for the 101, 201, this is a URL you can find. The challenge is so hard to find all those URLs. I know people asking me. I agree, it's very hard to find this URL. This is where I try to make it simple. If you go to enterprisetableau.com, this is a very simple URL for you to remember. Enterprisetableau.com. Actually, it is my blog site. Go there and you will see I do have a link on the top called Server Admin Talk link. If you click that link, that gave you the URL right away for all the previous recordings of this server admin talk. Today, again, our focus is server render time, more specifically focusing on how you can configure, optimize your vSQL servers and your hyper servers. When I think about Tableau dashboard performance, there are three things heavily impact a dashboard render time. One is, of course, the workbook design. I have seen so many kind of badly designed workbooks. Easily, we can cut the render time half if they design their view differently. The second, of course, is the data. They try to put too much data, or the join is not effective enough. That will also impact very bigly on the render time. So when anyone asks you, challenge you, hey, your server is not performing, talk to them for those two things, their workbook design and their data. Very often, it's not your server issue. Your server, our server cannot make their workbook faster if they don't have good design, if they try to put too much data. Of course, there is a third factor, which is a server. If the workbook is very fast on the desktop, but very slow on the server, or the workbook was performing good most of the days, then suddenly it's not performing well. That could be server. So server is more like we don't slow them down, or we don't have a server-wide memory or CPU bottleneck. Barely you will make them faster, but as long as we don't slow them down, that is our primary goal of a server side. Okay. Today, I'm going to share with you 7 tips, tricks that we can make our server performing effectively when we deal with the render time. Here is a list of all the 7 things. I'll double click on each of them. One is configure the cache, make the cache very long. For example, 24 hours. That is my server cache setting, 24 hours. Second, make your VSQL session timeout very short, very short. I recommend 3 minutes. That is also my server setting. Third, configure VSQL process memory setting and try to let it recycle itself at about 60% versus out of box almost 100%. That is too late. Number 4, similarly, make your hyper process memory recycle at earlier stage versus too late out of box. When I say too late, it means the whole server is spending, then the recycle itself is too late. Damage is made already. How can you make the hyper process recycle early enough? There are always 2 hyper processes over there. One recycling, the other one can still handle the remaining workload. It's better than having the whole server spending. Number 5, can we kill a badly designed long hyperqueries? So one query will not bring the whole server or whole hyper process spending. Can we do that? The answer is yes, there is a way to do that from both memory and the CPU perspective. That's 5 and 6. Of course, number 7, there's some VIP dashboards, some smart workbook owners, they can always send email subscriptions, time their email subscriptions right before the VIP executives start to use the dashboard every day. Okay, that is something controlled by more like workbook owners, not much on the server side. Okay, but that's another tip, can be done with selective dashboards. So those are 7 things that will make your dashboard render time better, or will not slow down the server render time when the workload is high or during the peak hours. I have done all those 7s, and I've been running actually all of those for at least a year. This is why I think it's time for me to share with everyone. Those are the good settings that can improve your server render time. Let me double click each of them. Start with cache. The behavior of a Tableau server is, you like it or not, single cache policy for the whole server. Single cache policy. No matter how many sites you have, how many workbooks you have, you can only set one cache policy for the whole server. And the situation is that you will have both live connections and extracts on the server. And the live connections prefer short cache or no cache, where the extracts prefer long cache for the better performance. You always have this situation. That is the challenge on Tableau server. By default, the cache policy setting is refresh less often. It means cache and reuse data as long as possible, which is good. This is actually relatively good default, giving us only one caching policy on the server. Okay. If your workload is mostly live connection to your database, of course, you will choose a third setting, refresh more often, of course. That's the easy part. but very, very common. You and I will have mixed workload with live and extracts. How to handle that? Sounds like the middle selection should be for us. Actually, it is for us for this most common use case, balanced. And when you select balanced, you have another big decision to make on the server for the whole server. That is how long the cache should be. I test my server with 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, 18 hours. Until the 18 hours on my server, I start to see a performance gains. Okay, I start to see my performance better. Average render time, or if you look at 75 percentile render time, better. I don't see a difference actually from my server. Your server will be different. I encourage yourself to test it out. Okay, testing is not simple. You need to reboot the server every single time you change. So it takes many weeks of testing, but test it out on really how many hours is the optimized cache setting for your server to achieve overall better render time. I'm setting 24 hours right now on my server. I recommend minimum 12 hours. When you have this balance setting, and of course, you will also choose the number 2 setting on the right side. That is, check the pre-compute recently viewed workbooks. That's no brand. Definitely should check that. Okay, means the cache warm up. Now, I know the question. Now the question is that when you set the cache so long, 12 hours, 24 hours, what happened with the live connection? The people who have live connection will complain a lot. I agree. There are 2 options I'll leave to you for dealing with a live connection when we set the whole server cache policy very long. One is that a little bit more work, number 3. Okay, number 3 is a little bit more work, but it works. If your server does not have a lot of live connections, and if those workbooks with live connection are really critical to get the freshness of their data, a tip is that publish a workbook in one place and then create another workbook with very simple, but just embed the previous workbook view here in the secondary workbook. And then you share the second workbook URL out. When you embed, you always have refresh equal to yes option. That's all. So basically, there is an extra step. I'll repeat. This only works for a situation where you don't have a lot of live connection workbooks, where for one live connection workbook, publish workbook once. Okay, don't share that URL and create another workbook. The second workbook is very simple, just only embed the first workbook URL into the second workbook. When you embed it, set refresh yes, and then share the audience with the second workbook only. That means that whenever they click that the workbook view always refresh yes. So every single time you force it refresh in the URL, like just one tip. Now, this may be hard to sell for you to your publishers, especially if they have a lot live connection workbooks. They will not agree with you. Okay. So what's other options? I do have other options, but a little bit of work. Okay. But this is what I have for the last 2 years on my server. If you dare to do some black belt project, here's how to do it. If you go to my blog site, enterprisetableau.com, I have a 10 automation things. Number 10 I list over there is how to make some workbook cache shorter than others. This is the how to deal with this situation. To make it simple, it is a simple update to the workbooks table where I add, did I add or minus? I think I add a 1 millisecond to a timestamp. Add a 1 millisecond to a timestamp, last published ad. You can also use last update ad if you want. So what happens is that if I update timestamp with 1 millisecond, automatically the workbook cache is dropped. A workbook, that special workbook cache is dropped. So that workbook will not hold a cache 24 hours or 12 hours. If you run this script every hour, basically the cache for that workbook will hold only 1 hour. Again, there's no API. It is updated to a Tableau Postgres table directly. It's not supported, but it works. I've been working on my server for the last 2 years. Do I recommend to you? I don't know, but it works. All right, this is, again, going back, is the intent is set cache very long to achieve overall server render time performance. And there is a way to dealing with a live connection. Okay. All right, move on to the second one. Second one is to set your VSQL session timeout very short. By default, it is 30 minutes. Think about 30 minutes. This vSquery session is end-to-end, how long it takes when the user clicks till render. 30 minutes? Nobody can wait for 30 minutes. Nobody. Maybe some people can wait for 2 to 3 minutes, but nobody wants to wait for 30 minutes. That doesn't make sense to have a 30 minutes timeout. Then think about if there is badly designed workbook, render about 20 minutes, that takes a lot of computing resources of your server. That is not right. I strongly recommend set it as 2 to 3 minutes. 2 to 3 minutes. Again, you may get a pushback from others. I set it at 3 minutes on my server. So what happens when a workbook render more than 3 minutes? You'll get error message in the UI. When I say UI, means in the browser, like that. The end user will get error message from their browser like that, which is not a bad error message, actually. They can click again, but nothing happens. They will not be able to get the view, which is good. They can give feedback to the owner of the workbook. Here, your view is not working. Redesign for me. So it's not bad. Now, you may ask 3 minutes, maybe too short. Some of your server admin view may not come back within 3 minutes. I agree. At least half of my server admin views will not render with 3 minutes setting, but I live with that. I always find other ways I can design my own server admin view, make the better render. Yes, out-of-box server admin views, a couple of those never come back more than 3 minutes. I know it, but I live with that. Okay. I hold also myself a server admin accountable for. Okay, and there's no way to make exceptions, which is good if you think with this setting. All right, this is the second. Stick with that. Make it short. So the whole intent of this setting is to avoid one badly designed workbooks that could bring the whole server down. This is the whole intent, and this is a critical control. That is kind of control we always have been waiting for. Number 3, now I'm going to do deep. Okay, the previous 2 settings are relative straightforward, relative. Now, number 3, this QL process memory. Now I'm going to talk about memory in next 3 settings. The behavior of this QL memory, that is actually is mixed, is good and bad, this behavior. The behavior is that when the memory is too low on the server or the vSphere query uses too much memory, it has a reclamation process itself. When the vSQL memory reach about 80% of your system memory or host memory, means writing, pushing more things to like paging, make it overall slower, but not crash your server. When it reach about 100%, it restart itself. That is behavior, restart itself. Okay. I'm assuming you always have a multiple instance of these QL servers. So for example, the picture I have on the right side, there are 5 or 6 of those. So if one of them restart, so not bad, you know, okay. The problem of this behavior, I wish this can be better, is that the restarting happens too late. Means damage is made already. You see the whole server or a lot of people dashboard spending already. It's too late. I would like the server, the vSphere server, restart at somewhere 60% memory before the damage is made. That is what I want to do. Can we do that? How to do that? That's the question. How we can let this QL restart earlier enough before damage is made. The good news is there is a setting. There is a setting. That is what I have here on my slide. Let me talk a little bit more for that. First of all, as you notice, there are 2 steps. One is make it true, enable that. Secondly, you give a memory and number. The question is, what is the value? I'll give you an example. If your host, for example, has about 300 gig with 4 vSphere nodes without Firestore, without Hyper, okay? Let's say you have this situation. What is the value of the numbers you gave? Again, I recommend keep at 60% recycle itself. 60% of 300 means almost 200 gig. But divided by 4, that'll be 50. So the value you should set is 50. Just number 50 means 50 gig. Okay. 3 important notes. Number 1, I know you're asking, you're thinking, hey, if you recycle the vSQL server so often, what is the impact to your users? Very good question. Based on what I haven't seen, I can confirm with you, there is no measurable impact on the recycling of the vSQL process. There's no. My server, recently, I do recycle very often because there was other issue. I recycle them daily. Of course, we pick a low usage hour. I doing a rolling recycle daily. For a month, I have not heard anyone complains. I can tell you a lot more in theory what happens when recycling, but basically, if someone has a session over there, If they are in the middle of the filter selection, the previous selection may be gone, but just very soon, just the browser will just lead them to another working or active viz query process. It's like they almost don't feel it. In theory, it will have some impacts, but no magical impact. Okay, that's number one. Number two, if you look for documentation, you probably will not find this setting. I don't know why Tableau did not document this feature, but it works perfectly. I've been using this setting for a little over a year on my server. Okay. Number three, this setting does not only apply to the VizQL process, it also applies to the hyper process. Think about it. It also applies to the hyper process. Okay. If your node, if your host has both VizQL process and also hyper, you may want to do your calculation, how much hyper you want to leave. In this case, in this example, maybe set as 40. Now the 40, if you set as 40, if there is a file store or hyper node here, if we set a 40, the 40 gig hyper may be good, may not be good. That's a challenge. Okay. That is a challenge that I also had last year, but here's good news. That become my next number 4 setting, the hyper process memory. The previous setting applies to the same number, applies to both this QL process and the hyper process. For large deployment of Tableau server, we normally have a standalone hyper node, means one hyper node normally have 2 hyper nodes. It's called house nodes. Normally have 2 house nodes serving maybe 5, 6 VizQL nodes. I'm talking about large deployment. Okay. Now, if you restrict the hyper node with 40 or 50 gig memory, that may be too low for your hyper. You're not leveraging the hyper node memory good enough. That was the situation I had for a period of time. Now the good news is that there is a separate configuration TSM that only dealing with hyper process memory. That is what you're seeing here as a solution piece. In this example, if your hyper node, I'm talking about house node, has 300 gig memory, I recommend you set 70%, which is about 200 gig or 210 gig for your hyper. So this way, you have hyper set good enough at your 70%, you have viz query set about 60, 70%. That's good. I think that's better setting. Again, this setting is also undocumented, but it works perfectly. Move on next. So far, we talked about 4 configurations. Those 4 should be good, should be available for all the servers, no matter how large, how small the servers are. Okay. Again, it's long cache as long as possible. Why I prefer fixed hours, 24 hours or 12 hours versus as long as possible, because the Tableau server default one as long as possible. I never know what it means. It's a black box for me. I don't like it. When my user asks what happened with my dashboard, it's not refreshing. I don't know what cache the server was doing. If I set 12, 18 or 24 hours, at least I can explain to the user what happened, because the server cached 24 hours. Okay, that's why I prefer set 24 hours, of course. Number 2 is very straightforward. Make viz query session timeout very short, 2 to 3 minutes, time them out. Okay. Number 3, reduce the memory recycle to 60% of the system memory, basically recycle them more often before damage is made. Number 4 is similar, but for hyper. Recycle the hyper memory or let hyper restart by itself before damage is made. Normally have at least two hyper nodes, at least, right? You recycle one, you still have another one serving the users. So basically, other than number 1, the remaining 2, 3, 4 are main purpose is to isolate or localize some badly designed workbooks impacts, make them less impact to the others. Pretty much those whole intent, okay? Isolate those. Either you by killing them or just recycle one small piece of the process versus impacting the whole server. Question, is that possible when we recycle the hyper, recycle the vSquared setting, we kind of recycle more often? Is it possible that one large query can take all available memories and keep recycling your vSquared and our hyper very often? Is that possible? Okay, because my recommended setting is make it recycle more often. Make the memory kind of 60% or 70%. With that, is it possible this is one large workbook can just keep recycling your server? Possible? For the vSQL, I have not seen this behavior. Maybe you have that, but for the last few years, been managing the server, I have not seen that behavior on the vSQL server. But I did experience a large query took all the memory on my hyper nodes. That makes whole server again spending. How to do that? How to deal with that? The hyper. I call it hyper-D. It is a hyper-D process. Well, if I share with you, this is what actually exactly happened on my server for the hyper. There are a bunch of very large workbooks. So when I say very large, I'm not talking about size, okay? This is not size. This is a memory consumption of an individual view. Top one consumes more than 200 gig. How do I find this? I found it from a Splunk log later on as part of research. Of course, the 200 gig, that's way too big. But how do we deal with that? Okay, how do you deal with those workbook owners? They may not know. Be honest, the workbook owner may not know just because the filter combination just putting too much data. He's not aware of. The owner is not aware of. How do we deal with that? The good news is that there is a setting. If you don't know why this setting, okay, this setting is called session memory limit. This session will limit a single session in the hyper process to a specific limit you set. I recommend 5 to 10 gig maximally for any single hyper query session. This is a session for query. Okay. If you set 10 gig, if I go back to my previous slide, see 10 gig, you set 10 gig, all those should be gone automatically, should be killed automatically without impacting others. I had those before, that's before the setting was available. Now I never had that anymore. That is a peace of mind. That is what I call life-saving feature for me as a large server admin. It saves my server. So what happens for user when they click a workbook, a dashboard, where the view query hyper consume more than 10 gig of memory? This below is the error message they will see. It's not bad error. not bad error. So basically the setting is killed. It's not killed by these QLs, okay? It's killed by the hyper setting. It's killed in the hyper. This is good. I love this setting. I recommend, again, 5 to 10 gig. Again, this is to avoid some better design workbooks, okay? And impact the rest of our servers. It happens, okay? So this is a memory, a session memory, hyper. Now, next you may ask, is any such session CPU hyper setting? Okay, yes, there is. That's good news. There's hyper dot query underscore total underscore time underscore limit. That's good news. But the bad news is this feature, I couldn't figure out how to make it work. It's very hard for me to use. I'm open my ear. If anyone here in the community, I know there are a lot of smart admins. If you are able to make this work, please share with me how it works on your server. I find it very hard for this one, although the feature is available. I have two challenges. Do I have that on the server? I do, but I cannot verify how well this is working. I cannot verify how many being killed because of this setting. And I don't think we even killed anything. My challenge, I have two challenges of using this setting. And if you are Tableau dev team, now it's time for me, for you to hear from me why this setting is so challenging, not practical to use. Number one reason why it's so challenging is that this is not single session, not single thread hyperquery time. It's a total thread sum up together. Hyper can spend multiple thread, depends on how many CPUs you have on your host nodes. Okay, for example, if there are 30 threads, each takes 100 seconds. So this total setting, the total time is 3,000 seconds. It's very hard. It's very hard to do. Okay. Second one is this setting not only apply only to the query, but also apply to overwriting. Overwriting means the extracts. When you create the extracts using the backgrounders, once it's done, the backgrounder will need to overwrite to the host node file store with a new version of the extracts, right? The overwriting actually takes normally longer time than a query, but users don't feel that. You don't even see that, right? That's part of the overall more like backgrounder process. So the challenge is the same setting, query total time limit, applies to both query and overwriting. So that makes it even harder to figure out. You cannot set too small, otherwise your backgrounder process will fail. So this is a little bit of challenge. Actually, it's very difficult to use, okay? But it's one feature available. Again, if anyone in the community figures out how to make this work, I would love to learn from you. Of course, number 7, this is my last tip, where some smart workbook owner have been using. Again, as a server admin, we almost don't have a control, but it is a feature I wanted to, not feature, is a behavior that for some critical executive dashboards, if they do not want to see their executive waiting render early morning, one option is, of course, they can subscribe the V's early enough, to warm the cache up. This works very good with the long cache setting. We talked about number 1 in the beginning, right? You warm up early in the morning, then the rest of the day should be good. But be careful, this is the double-sided sword, okay? One is that make performance better for the following viewers, but it adds extra workload subscription, maybe unnecessary subscription on your server. Just be careful, not use this too often. This is why my note over there is only for a few executive dashboards only. Okay. All right, let me recap. I think this is all I plan to have. I do have another 50 minutes. We can do a QA. Let me do a recap before we jump to QA. Today's talk is around Tableau server performance, more specifically, the VizQL process and hyper process optimization or configuration, with the 7 things can be done to make sure the server performance at its best, to avoid some better design workbooks from bringing the whole server down. Those 7 things, again, is number 1, set cache very long, 18 or 24 hours if you can. Plus, always set cache warm up, set pre-computer, basically, it's cache warm up feature. Number 2, time out your VizQL session at about 2 to 3 minutes. Number 3, number 4 are undocumented features, but works perfectly. One is dealing with VizQL memory recycling early enough at about 60. Okay. And the number 4, dealing with hyper process memory recycling at about 60–70% of the system memory. On Tableau server, we should always have multiple instances of VizQuery sessions and also multiple sessions of hyper. So when the recycling happens, the impact is minimal to the rest of audience, or almost no measurable impacts. Okay. Number 5 is a life-saving, at least for my server, especially for the large deployment. It's really life-saving, killing the hyper session when a single session uses too much memory. I recommend set a 5 to 10 gig memory limit. Number 6 is the CPU. Is a feature available? I don't know how to use it well. Number 7 is a feature that not really for server admins, but mainly for the workbook owners, for a few critical VIP workbooks. All right, those are the things I have. Let me take some questions. So look at in the QA area. Let me do the QA. I don't have time to look at the chat. I'm assuming that we can help out each other, but I'm looking at the QA. There are 20+ questions. Bob Wicker, what page are you using to manage those settings? What setting? There are multiple things. Everything is TSM, basically. All those settings are TSM settings, okay? If I put this way, I don't know more specifically. It's all the TSM. I gave you the command of every single one. If you look, for example, this is, yeah, every single is TSM setting, okay? All right. Oh, sorry, maybe I did the wrong, yeah. Marcos, we are 2020.3. We don't have old configure console. Are those settings TSM? Yes, all those settings are TSM. Yoshiki, does cache policy setting TSM have? Yeah, good question. The longer cache, I don't know for sure. The cache policy setting is a TSM or is, I don't know for sure. I need to clarify, but look for documentation over there. I don't know for sure anymore. You have a good point. Yoshi, can you schedule refresh at a certain time? Can you schedule to refresh at a certain time? I'm not quite sure. You may want to ask again. If you're talking about refresh, extracts, of course, you can set refresh at a certain time. Not quite sure if that's a question you're asking. Next one, EE, Zhong, how many hours for refresh less often? 24 hours? The refresh less often, I don't know how many hours. I guess is 1 hour, but I don't know for sure. Again, this is Tableau's black box for me. I don't know. There is a question. Hello, what is recommended setting for cache for aggressive extract refresh like 50 minutes or 2 hours? Well, agree. If you extract refresh every 50 minutes or 2 hours, it does not make sense to have a 12 or 18 hours cache policy. In that case, you may have to apply my big trick. That is how to make some workbook cache shorter than others, doing the script updating the workbook's timestamp. Okay, that is something a little more tricky, but it works. I've been doing this for the last 2 years. A little tricky, but little work. Don't ask me the scripts, but I'll give you exactly the core concept of what is done. Okay. Alex, what is the best process for creating extract data snapshot? I would like a set of dashboards to contain static data at the year end. I don't know. You want to create extract snapshot, no refresh, you stop refresh schedule or change a different, create different workbook, point to different data source, never refresh. That is something can be done by workbook owners. Again, this is asking a snapshot of the data, like year end. Okay, embed them into the workbook. Don't refresh the workbook. That works. Barbara Walker, sorry. Next question. The only tab I see in my setting admin page are general, and the extensions. What pages are using those? Oh, for the, I know what they talk about, Bob. I know what they talk about. That's in the TSM UI. I know what they talk about. You are asking this number one, long cache setting, okay? You're asking where you see this. This is in the TSM UI, okay? When you say you only see my setting for general setting and extension setting, that is Tableau Server UI, is different. Launch your TSM UI, you will see this setting. All right, I got you, Bob. Okay. Next question. Condo ready. What we need to do if we have our live connection in the entire site? Again, the question is what setting should be if you have live connections, but for the whole site? Again, server side, the single cache policy for the whole server, that is behavior. Unfortunately, Tableau has no site-specific cache policy. Doesn't matter if you have a lot of live connection for the whole site or not. There's no site level setting for the cache. Okay, if you have a lot of cache, either use refresh more often, or you will have to use set cache long, but use my trick to update workbook timestamp every single hour, something like that, automatically. It's how are you managing resource limit exceed conditions? Have you told your end user how to communicate those problems? If they see error message like resource limit, I did put intranet in my intranet. I did announce this error message. Okay, when they see this error message, I did tell them that this is something they can contact the workbook owner. Okay, the workbook owner has to take some action. There's nothing can be done on the server side. This is a server timeout. It is a server timeout. We want it. Okay, Victor. If we have a lot of memory in the server, do we need to change this QL process memory cycle? Well, that's a good question. Let's say your server has a lot of memories, 500 gig, and your use pattern never reach to that, never even close that limit, only 5% or 10% of that memory. You never have this query. You never have a whole service spending because when this query process issue, well, you may not need to change any setting. You have like 512 gig, yeah, for example, for 4 of these queries process. You may not need that. But as long as you don't see your server never spending, sometimes the reality could be that you see a server spending, whole server slow, or a lot of people slow, even you don't know what happened. It could be because the this query took too much memory. It's hard to catch. It's hard to find out the memory unless you have Splunk plugin. Again, those are, you don't have to set any limit to see how it goes. Next question, Ravi, does a 3 minutes vSQL session timeout means that users that leave their window open will have to refresh their browser each time if left open for 3 minutes? Users have selected filter to look at content will have to restart if they walk away for a few minutes, something like that? No. The 3 minutes vSQL session means when they click a view, a Tableau server go through the whole process, getting query from a hyper, then render the view, compile the layout, render the view, the whole session, whole process, 3 minutes. If it takes longer, Tableau server will time it out, no matter users click or not. If users click again, if again same view, the users will not, user will not be able to see the dashboard render correctly, because the design of the workbook overall is so bad, it took more than 3 minutes, with server setting 3 minutes. They will be getting error messages like that. Computing the current visualizations has exceeded resource limit. They will never be able to see the view. That is behavior. That is actually pretty good design. Again, I shared it with you. It happened on my server. My server admin view will not come back. Some of those, I live with that. Curry, does live connection in a few refresh automatically with subscriptions? Subscriptions will refresh cache. Okay, that's the question. That's the answer. Set subscriptions, it will refresh cache. Zili, how to check the current system memory? That's your system memory. Okay, yeah, that got the answer from already from others. That's good. Nilim, we have a 3 nodes cluster with 32 gig memory in each. How do I set up vSQL process recycling? We have a 2 vSQL server running on each. Yeah, 3 nodes cluster on each have a 2 vSQL process, 32 gig. 32 gig, if I leave at 70%, that will be 20 gig something. 20 gig divided by 2, that'll be 10 gig. I will set, if I were you, I will set my vSQL server timeout. Talk about this setting at 10 gig. Okay, I will talk about this setting at 10 gig. Okay, at 10. This setting I'll set at 10 for your case. Neelam. We have 2 more minutes, but I have a lot of more questions. I don't know how many more we can finish, but I will stay for a few more minutes, try to finish the rest of the questions. Mohammed from Steve Jim. Hey, Mark, great talk. We have had frequent vSquared server crash recently. That happens, I know that. How to find out which workbooks are causing vSquared problem? That's a very good question, okay? It's all in the log, that's a problem. It's hard to find out which workbook. Is a log, either you use Logshark or you use Splunk. I use Splunk. Okay. I have both, but I found Splunk gave me more insights. I use Splunk to figure out which workbook. Even you do a Splunk, it's not a simple thing to figure out which workbook. I'm telling you. Yeah, I agree with you. It's not easy. But Splunk probably is your best shot. To recover the crash, I had to write the scripts to monitor the status and restart the whole server. Wow, you're good. Those restarting takes about 5 minutes. That's no good. Your restarting take 5 minutes. Restarting the whole server. That's no good. You should try to use all those settings I mentioned. Okay. Those will avoid. Those will avoid. Okay. Even you don't know which workbook, you don't have to find out which workbook is causing a problem. You don't have to. You set the settings to avoid any workbook that will cause a problem. I think this talk will be good for you in your case. Vin, it looks like there was a web UI way to change the cache setting. Yes, there's web UI. The web UI is TSM, correct, web UI. Okay. Bob, again, what are the benefits of using standalone house nodes versus other? Okay, a house node, basically, if you have a standalone, nothing else, no vSquared, no background on it, this applies to a more like large deployment. You wanted to make sure your hyper normally have 1, 2, or 3 only. You want to make sure your hyper has all the enough computing power to handle your workload, basically. That's benefits. The benefits, again, is to make sure you have enough computing power for your hyper. Because hyper is more like core to do all, especially if you use a lot of extracts, okay? That's mainly for large deployment. It's 1 minute past. I'll try to stay another 10 minutes or so. Let me check my time. I think I have some, yeah, I can go another 10 minutes. Bob, again, we have custom data collection application that use Hyper API to build extracts, and users using tab command to publish update data source to Tableau server 10, 20 times an hour. Okay, that's a lot. What Tableau server process are involved, and how many of each process should configure for this situation? Since data changes so often, how do we benefit from cache? Well, overall, if they're doing the Hyper API to create extracts outside Tableau and just push to the server, they barely use any of your server resources, much at all. Very minimum server resources. So I'm not too concerned if they push 20 times an hour to the server, because it almost does not impact anything on the server. Okay, minimal resources. I'm not too concerned. How do we do the cache setting? Well, the cache will not apply to those at all. Basically, for this case, the cache will be, any cache will be bad, because any cache will try to go other way around. The data changes so often, like 20 times an hour, every 3 minutes or so. Basically, is no cache is better. And the best way to go, if you dare to do my way, it will be like this. Again, go to my blog, automation, how to make some workbook cache shorter than others. You can using a script for those workbooks to dump the cache every 5 minutes. That's what I have. But it takes some design. Okay. Go to my blog site, automation number 10. You can make it happen. Every 3 or 5 minutes, dump the cache. Next one, 知力. I have one workbook refresh failed because extended timeout limit. Okay, that's fair. That's good, actually. The user asking if I can increase the limit. No, don't increase. Of course, don't increase. Limit is set, limit is set. If extract failed, I have a lot of failures every day. Is up to the user, up to the workbook owner. They have to design their joins more effectively, either reducing the size or using incremental or redo the join. Don't change your timeout. Okay, play hard. Victor, how to design Hyper-D memory usage from Splunk? Yeah, it's not very easy, but it's very hard for me to explain. But you can find out from Splunk Hyper-D. You have to Google around. You will find out. It's very hard for me to explain. Multilayer. Can you please give recommendation on Tableau data management server prep flow? The data management add-on, the prep flow. The prep flow follows there is a timeout setting on the prep flow. Although the default prep flow timeout is 4 hours, I set it 2 hours, which is the same as my extracts timeout. That is to keep it simple. Shonan, Morgan, for the large memory consuming workbooks, what do you recommend the workbook owner to do? Reduce data set? As long as they know their workbook is timed out because of memory, they will know because their users will complain to them. Okay, they will know how to do it. Depends on the data. For example, one of the example I gave was like 200 gig. That was just combination of memory, the combination of filter. The people select 12 months data that causing the memory as 200 gig. Well, take that filter out. Don't create a filter for users to select more than 1 year data. Okay, reduce to 3 months, something like that. That was true example I gave. I experienced. They will know how to do it. Okay, as long as you set your policy and stick with that. Bob, where do you set number of Hyper-D process? You cannot. On a single node, there's only one Hyper-D. You cannot change that. Okay, but you can have multiple host nodes. You can have multiple file stores. Today, I think I have 3 or 4 file stores. Just create more nodes, more hosts. That's it. Zili Liang, again, can you explain again why you recommend a VIP subscription in the morning? Yeah. If you have a VIP users, you know they started their day at 7:30 in the morning. You want to make sure that dashboard performs best. So maybe at 6:30 a.m. You can subscribe to their dashboards. Okay. So when they start the day 7:30 or 8, it's cached. Performance is better, basically. Again, just double-sided sort, use it cautiously because subscription is additional workload. And this is more like a necessary workload. But make performance better for a few selective VIP dashboards, that's no doubt. Next question, Yoshi. I mean, if you are refreshing cache every 12 hours, can I schedule refresh? Oh, I see. I recommend setting refresh cache every 12 hours or 18 hours or 24 hours. Can you schedule what 12 hours? No, unfortunately, I don't know how. I I don't think there is setting which 12 hours. I think what happened is that it's not, it's 12 hours, but it's from the time when the cache was built. You know, the servers so many different dashboards. Each one has different view time. So it is the 12 hours is not your fixed 12 hours, is the maximum 12 hours cache hold for any specific query cache. Okay. So the query cache time is different because it depends on what time users click the view, right? So actually it does not make sense if you think to have like 1 a.m. to 13 to 1 p.m. setting. No, it doesn't make sense because it depends. The 12 hours is a maximum the query cache will hold on the server. Depends on what time users click the view. Okay. Sharif, what kind of metrics do you like to determine if the setting change has been success? Average runtime of the view. Yes, this is where I talked about in my Tableau Server Admin 101, your metrics. I use Tableau, I use average render time, and also I use 75% of render time. I use 75% of render time for extracts only. I looked at multiple things, okay? Normally, the average render time will be good, but sometimes not necessary. That's why you may want to look for additional ways to do it. Like 75 percentile will filter out the few slow ones. And if you find a way, that's very hard, but it's possible. If you find a way to look at the render time for extracts only workbook, because some live connections may mess up your metrics, okay? If you find a way to look at live extracts only workbook render time, that'll be a good indicator. That's what I do as well. Okay, how do you get the update ID and the password in the, that's, you have to Google it, you'll find the password. That's, okay. If we keep this QR session 3 minutes, then we will get a session timeout error after 3 minutes. Yes, you will. This may be some report takes 3 minutes longer. Yes, that's intent. Is to kill the reports take 3 minutes longer. That is intent. Do you run a query for making some workbook cache in Tableau account, not read only? Or you have to use the read and write account that you will Google it, you will find out how to get the account. Okay, it's not read only for sure. Can the extracts success or failure notification be sent to email distribution list? No, unfortunately. What could be the causing the backgrounder to go down? Causing background to go down? Background does go down sometimes, I know. What can cause? The memory also can be the issue. Sometimes there is a Java heap memory can cause go down. But you have multiple backgrounders, as long as you restart your server weekly, something, take care, those should be good. There are a lot of similar questions about how to get the TSM UI. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have time to walk through this TSM UI. What is Tableau server version? I'm caching setting issue. Yes, I have two server versions, 2020.1 and 2020.3. Sorry to keep bothering you, but TSM UI does not look at yours. Oh, I see. Maybe I have an older one. Maybe this may have to do with having server managed add-on. I see. Okay. Maybe a screenshot. I'll take care of a screenshot. Look at screenshot. No matter how if the server is on Linux or Windows, the same settings. Those apply to both. Doesn't matter Linux or Windows. All right, I think I got. Sorry that I'm behind the schedule, but I got to the bottom of all the questions. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and looking forward to talk to you next month. Thank you, Alisa. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.